following presentation is for educational purposes only. All of the symbols, trading ideas, and live trading are for demonstrational purposes and are not recommendations or trading advice. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. All of the information and opinions expressed by third-party guests are their own and are not necessarily those of NinjaTrader LLC. Trading futures involve substantial risk and may not be suitable for everyone, and trading futures can result in losses greater than the initial required margin. Traders should only trade futures with risk capital. Risk capital is money that you can afford to lose without jeopardizing your financial security or current lifestyle. You can find additional disclosure information on the NinjaTrader website.
Well, welcome back to NinjaTrader Live. I'm your host, Tom Schneider, CMT with NinjaTrader, and we're at the Traders Workshop portion of the stream, and it's my pleasure to welcome back Tanya of TanjaTrades. How you doing, Tanya?
Hello, what's up? Could be better. Pretty much closed out my trade earlier for because I didn't like how we were gyrating back and forth. But pretty impressive morning from NQ, I think, right? With CPI really just pushing us like 200 points up, and then we just retraced that open, and that was it. We surged for the rest of the day. Pretty
Yeah,
impressive.
I think you're right, Tanya. I think that that reaction was, I think Bobby Acino said it best, was correct. But Nasdaq kind of getting a second lift off after, into the open, or right at the open, was kind of emblematic, I think, of how Nasdaq has been viewed lately. Which is, if we're going to be bullish, Nasdaq might be your rocket ship.
Right. It's actually Nvidia and Apple are up very strong. I believe Nvidia's up like 4.5%, Apple's up about 3.5%. So every time I try like a short or something, I don't really give it a lot of time to work out because it's not going because the market's just so strong. So if I have like a short idea for a possible retracement, which I was, ended up cutting it for like a scratch essentially. And because it's just not worth it for me to hang around too much on the short side. It works for a small amount of time, and you kind of just have to be I'm a little bit more strict on things like that. But yeah, I definitely was thinking that we'd get a little bit more of a retracement at the open uh, to long, and it's all right. Well, we have more news later on at 2 p.m. FOMC rates
Right.
and the press conference. So that's going to be interesting. I think I will be streaming that later as well.
That's great. You don't, your schedule generally is the morning, right? And you have a nice chunk of time in the morning, but you don't usually do a lot of afternoon streaming, because you're done, right? You've got
Yeah.
your routine.
Yeah. I like to just mostly trade the mornings. I think they're probably the most uh, more volatile than the afternoons. Of course, you have power hour, which is always interesting, especially if you're in a bull market, like we are in, and we're hitting all-time highs. The last hour tends to be very um, fun to trade or strong. But yeah, if I'm done for the day, then and I've made my money, and or even if I lost money and I hit a certain threshold on my losses, pretty much just gonna not trade the afternoon if I traded enough of the morning. But FOMC is a little bit unique because it injects a lot of volatility into the marketplace, especially when Jerome Powell is speaking. So I'm kind of excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, you mentioned you're going short in a bullish day. Counter trend trades tend to be a little bit shorter, right? Because it's going against the trend, and your stops should be a little bit tighter because of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's where I'll trail my stops more aggressively, uh, essentially, because all of a sudden then if you keep switching and moving your stops away, then you're actually going to get really hurt. And then you can actually get blinded and about the bigger picture, right?
Right.
So I'm always very careful in those situations. It does look like ES a little bit weaker than the Nasdaq because just the strength of tech really with Nvidia and Apple just really leading the market today.
Now, question for you, because on a day like today, I think that a CPI report, of course, reflects on interest rates and what the Fed could do, especially on the same day that the Fed's reporting, right? That doesn't always happen. We know that.
Hmm.
Um, but interest rates really affect the Russell. Would you have, do you ever trade the Russell?
I
Um,
don't really trade the Russell. I think
yeah,
I'd like to maybe get into it because I think I used to trade IWM when I was trading options, definitely. So small cap stocks are definitely interesting.
right.
And
IWM, for those who don't know, that's the ETF
yeah.
that for the Russell 2000 small caps, as we call them. I just say that Russell's almost up 3% today versus
Hmm.
the strong Nasdaq is 1.5, and then of course
Hmm.
E-mini is just over one. Um, you know, we're not seeing that pullback on the Russell. We're seeing a little bit of pullback off the highs, but I mean, maybe we can show my screen. I don't know, Tanya, if you
Hmm.
have your screens available as well, but here's the Russell 2000 futures, still trading within 10 handles of where the highs were. We're not seeing that pullback that we saw. Well, Dow, forget the Dow, NASDAQ and E-mini. So this might be, proving to be a little bit more bullish than the bigger sectors, but not a reason to switch, right? If you're not, for new traders, if you're familiar with trading, if you're learning on the E-mini S&P or you're learning on the NASDAQ, today is not the day to switch to a different market because something might be happening.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd like to, if you really know one market, such as the Nasdaq and how the Nasdaq moves, it's best to just stick with that one or like I do Nasdaq and S&P mini. Because if you suddenly, well, first off, if you can't just decide to switch and actively trade it with real money right away, because the reality is you don't really know how that instrument moves. Like we know how quickly Nasdaq moves at certain points in a certain amount of time. Like I know it can move 10 handles in a minute very quickly.
Right.
Uh, Meanwhile, you don't know about the Russell. Does it typically retrace deeply or does it um, take out more sell stops? I don't know, or like how long do you think typically you want to be in the trade for? I really don't I don't advocate for switching
Yeah.
instruments that quickly. Yeah, although people love to tell me to look at crude oil and gold. Uh, Maybe I will. Um,
But that
but
again,
not with real money and not on live streaming it really.
well, right. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, those are very much more of an extreme, right? Because they're different dynamics driving those markets, and they're more global, I would say, right? So you kind of have to see what happened in the overnight, what happened in the European session. I
Mhm.
would say more so than, let's say, Nasdaq or E-mini, just because gold, crude, global markets, and then the timing, right? Because we know 9:30 to 4 stock market, that's something that we know pretty much, right away. But what's the open of the oil market? What's the open of the gold market? You have to be
Yeah, and you
careful
have
too,
different news. I
right?
believe today 10:30 was crude oil inventories.
Exactly. Right. We had the petroleum status report. If you're trading ags, today is the biggest report of the month at noon with the supply and demand reports. So a lot of fireworks today. It just happens to be the day you're on, Tanya. But
Mhm.
you're right. There's very smart to be in a sim account if you're starting to explore another market, for on any day. Just forget today. Any day, you want to get the rhythm of that market, which, like you said, could be news, it could be trading hours, it could be how it trades in other sessions. Important things to know if you're new to a market.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Tanya, one of the things that was really cool that you did was you polled your audience about what they wanted to learn, which is,
Hmm.
really, really cool that you do that, and you have a great user base or audience that responded. And one of the things they came up with was, okay, Tanya, you're getting ready to trade this morning. You're sitting down in front of your desktop or your laptop or however you trade. What kind of things do you look at in terms of what you're looking at in charting, right?
Hmm.
So maybe not the news, maybe not reviewing your yesterday's trades, but really how are the charts presenting to you with possible trade ideas or just knowing the environment before you go in?
Right. So one major thing I do look at is how did we trade through London session and pre-market? Are we gapping up on the day? Like today, we were pretty much gapped up like 250 points on the NASDAQ. And are we gapping up towards my direction of like where I think the market is going to go if I'm bullish, right? And if it's already done so, and then I mark out how much it gapped up and I do divide it into different quartiles to see okay, how much of a pullback are we going to get? Are we going to retrace about 25% or 50% of the way? But even NASDAQ today, it really didn't even retrace like 25% of that gap up from the regular trading hours. So then from that, I mark that out and I'm looking for a lot of the times just a opposing liquidity run. So I look for a liquidity run where there's equal lows or a gap into which price will reach into. And I essentially look for a reaction there and a break instruction in the other opposite direction to buy retracement into. So today on the NASDAQ, I did end up missing it, that trade.
And so
Well,
let's
as my audience loves to point out to me. But I could probably yeah, if you just go to the 1 minute on the
sure.
NASDAQ,
Yeah, maybe we can. Yeah, that's
after
great.
it took out that, yeah, so that pre-market low, it took that out, so that does count as a liquidity sweep. Um, so at the open, we took out that little pre-market low,
So at
intermediate
the
term
open,
low,
right?
yeah, from the one a little bit more to the left, around like 845.
Right here.
And then we had a strong reaction to the upside where we broke a high.
So you're saying, okay, into the open, and I've got my it's kind of hard to see. I've got my pivots kind of as the same markings as my open. That's not on purpose, but here's the
Yeah.
open. We came down, we took out the low here after the big move, but then we turned right around, and so you're saying you would have tried to get long here? Are you
We
looking to
wait for
get
the reaction there.
the
So I
so
would
you wait for
definitely
this?
don't just get long into such a large gap. So then after it broke that a high afterwards and it created that little fair value gap, then you could buy in there. I personally just missed that because I don't really trade the first 15 minutes of the day. I like to see how we open, especially if we have a large gap up. But a lot of my um, people in my community definitely caught that little buy at like, let me see, what time would have that been? Around like 9:36, right? When that little candle retraced into that 1 minute fair value gap. Yep. And
Right here.
that high. Hmm.
Okay, and
And
so your time, your kind of time of we
I do
do a
look at
half
time of
hour,
day a lot. Yeah. So
right?
um the last 10 minutes of 1 hour into the next is my sweet spot.
Okay, so here's I just marked it with this tool we have. Here's 15 minutes into the open, right? So you're kind of saying, well, let's see how the day is kind of unfolding
Yeah.
when the institutions come in and there's a lot of volume. Um, so you're saying despite that or not overlapping that is this 10 minutes before the 10 o'clock hour, maybe 10 minutes before the 11 o'clock hour, that's when you like to participate a little more.
Yeah, I do.
And what's your
And
reasoning behind that? I'm just curious.
it's like the hourly close on on
Yep.
the hourly chart,
Okay.
and then start the next one. So you could actually you'll see like manipulate like it take out previous hour high or low candle and then continue into the opposite direction, things like that.
Got it.
Um, and also with the 1050 one, that's going into London close.
Oh, right. Yeah, for
So
sure.
that one I look at.
So on a 1 minute chart, you're talking about right here. Um, a nice turnaround right at that
Yeah.
time. Okay. That's great. And we
Yeah.
can't
And essentially after 11 is when I decided to get out of that short because it just wasn't looking too promising. Yeah. So
so that's not a bad, I mean, that's not a bad exit at all, right? I mean, if
yeah,
you're
because
looking
I basically cut the trade by because it's London close, just like we talked about, right? So
right, right.
institutions are closing out their positions or taking profit or whatever they're doing.
There's a
Um,
little bit of volume comes in there as well.
yeah,
Right. And so this is the NASDAQ and the E-mini. If we were to switch over to there, I'm going to, redirect
yeah, the
it.
E-mini provided a bit of a better reversal there for sure.
So here's your 1050. You had a nice reversal there. And then kind of behave the same way, right? Systematic
Yeah,
trading right there. Didn't really get that reverse after that 11 o'clock as much as the NASDAQ did. It's looking a little more suppressed than the
right.
NASDAQ.
Yeah, the ES is definitely a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
just because Apple and Nvidia are really keeping up Nasdaq, and Nasdaq is more heavily weighted in those two companies.
Do you follow do you follow Nvidia, Apple? Are you looking at like the FANG
Yeah.
stocks or the Magnificent Seven, all these big?
Um, what I'll typically look at is like just a general heat map of the S&P 500, and then
Okay.
I'll see the tech stocks within that heat map, and then I'll get a good gauge on what is leading the market or what might be stalling the market. And then that sort of does help me frame my ideas a bit better on, okay, if Nvidia is up 4% and it's the leader of the market, I don't really want to hang around too much on a short idea
Right.
because it's just a monster and I don't want to short the market when the leader is leading.
Sure. Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
Along with like let's say, if Tesla's down 5% on the day and think then then I also just use it on which asset to trade. Um, because then if I'm looking for a long idea and Tesla is down 5% sort of and making NASDAQ lag, and I see the S&P 500 is a bit stronger structurally, then definitely I'm going to long ES, for example.
Right. But you might, and conversely, you might see an opportunity if Tesla recovers,
Yes. Yeah.
or you could also use that to your advantage intraday, right? If
Hmm.
something happens where, oh wow, Tesla was down or Nvidia was down, which doesn't happen a lot, but
Hmm.
then it recovered, right? And so, oh wow, I see this big advance in Tesla, maybe I'll jump in back into
Right.
NASDAQ. You rotate back in.
Right. Um, exactly. I do. And I'll put like little alerts at little 5-minute short-term highs and get alerted if that happens. And I think that's probably one of the better practices I've put in place is just putting in those alerts at the areas I'm actually interested in, especially if the morning is over. And maybe I'm still looking for something in the afternoon, but otherwise, I used to really spend a lot of time just glued to the charts, and then that would cause me to overtrade a bit and just trade ranges when we didn't hit either one of my points of interest. Meanwhile, if you just put your alerts in, then you can just walk away, you know?
Right, right. You don't get caught up into, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? I see something forming, but it's not giving me everything I need, but I'm gonna
Try it
force it.
anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I always say this, and for good or bad, we try to finish patterns, right? That's how we've been trained since we were kids in kindergarten on up, right?
Hmm.
What's
Like
the next
habits.
thing in patterns. And not, we probably do it in other areas of our life, but I think it can be really it can be beneficial if you know how to use it, but it can also be a crutch or can lead you down a path you don't want to go to. And so, alerts I think are great.
Hmm.
It frees you up to do other things, not necessarily trade related either. Could be clearing your mind. It could be getting some exercise. It could be taking care of things you need to take care of so that when you do get an alert, you can focus a little more intensely on the charts or
Right.
your trading in general.
Right. And I think people don't talk about that enough is your mind needs some time to be idle in order to be performing well when you need it to focus. So you need to actually have some sort of balance there. If you're trying to focus for hours and hours on the chart, you're going to get fatigued, especially if you're taking too many trades. There's a lot of decision fatigue going on because when you're in a trade, you are making nonstop decisions about whether you're going to stay in the trade, trail a stop, take profit. And if you're just taking too many trades, you might end up having decision fatigue and you end up trading even more poorly. So
Right.
I do advocate for that to have certain times away from the charts. I don't really trade after 11 and 11 to 1 pretty much. I'm never going to open up a trade during that time. If I'm already in it one from the morning and maybe I'm trailing, then that's a different story. But um, those are area times in the market where we don't see a lot of volatility. There's no high impact news going on. People are going to lunch, etc. So there's really gotten chopped up too many times during those times, essentially. And you just learn from experience a lot of times. I've learned the hard way many times.
Yeah, and there aren't a lot of news events coming out, barring maybe a Fed speaker at a luncheon, right? But
Yeah.
generally, news tends to trail off after 11, and maybe it's an auction at 1 o'clock that could move the market. But even then, we don't get a lot of news at 1 o'clock. It is morning mostly, and then you've got earnings after hours during earnings season. Question for you though, you mentioned when you're in a trade, you've got all these, you're constantly making decisions, right?
Hmm.
Which is a really good way of putting it. You're constantly thinking about the trade and uh where is the place to get out, right? Which is should be, kind of on your mind. But as you've evolved as a trader, do you find that you do less of that thinking because you've developed maybe something that allows you to get away from that thinking?
Yeah, I do. A lot of the times I do take trades and it becomes second nature the way that you manage it. You already know how you trade, right? If we're
Mhm.
closing below, if I'm short and we're closing below a low, then I'm going to trail the stop and perhaps take some profit. Um, or a lot, or sometimes I know based on structure, oh, we could actually retrace a bit more, and I might be in this trade for a little while because it's based on the 5-minute chart.
Right.
So I don't really want to micromanage it. And I especially make it a rule. If I'm in a trade and I entered on the 5-minute, I'm not going to manage it now on the 1-minute because that is just going to cause me to think about it too much and micromanage it and perhaps then trail a stop too tightly and get stopped out before the actual move plays out. So yeah, knowing what time frame I'm trading and having my game plan already set out really just helps not micromanage and then also not overtrade.
Oh, I completely agree with that, Tanya. That's a really good way of putting it. Um, when you have a shorter time frame, let's say a 1 minute, just as an example, your expectations for the trade should be a lot less than, let's say, a 5 minute or a 10 minute chart.
Hmm.
You've got a longer duration and probably greater expectations on the profit or loss, right?
Hmm.
It's a wider trading range. To suddenly go from a 10 minute or a 5 minute to a 1 minute doesn't make sense unless you're in it for a scalp anyway, which is not something I would totally recommend for new traders.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So so you mentioned you might stream this afternoon, which is great,
Yeah, I
around
think I
the
will
FOMC.
because This morning I sort of just ended up taking a small loss and then a scratch. So
Mhm.
still not putting such high expectations on like, oh, I have to find something this afternoon because there's still the rest of the week. We have PPI, we have tomorrow we have PPI news at 8:30, and then on Friday we have 10 a.m. consumer sentiment, right?
Right.
Um, the U of M consumer report. And yeah, there's plenty of time in the week. It's never just, you can't just force one trade or make it like, okay, this next one has to work out because the last two were not memorable. Like it's all about knowing the environment and being patient. So yeah, I think I will be streaming later today, probably at 2 p.m., but waiting until 2:30 to um really enter anything.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
that's great. Tanya, I really appreciate you coming on here. This half hour goes way too fast.
Yeah.
Can you let people know where to find you? I know we
Mhm.
know where to find you, but can you let our viewers know?
Yeah, just you can find me on YouTube, TanjaTrades. I do stream pretty much every day. And then you could also find me on Instagram and Twitter with the same handle, just TanjaTrades with a J.
Yes.
Yep. We'll see
Want,
you.
want to make it very clear. Tanya with the J. There's no one
Yes.
else. Tanya, there's no other Tanya trades. Again, we really
No,
appreciate you coming on, Tanya.
thank you.
Thank you, and good
See you
luck in your
guys.
trading today.
Yes, you
And
as well.
All of the symbols, trading ideas, and live trading are for demonstrational purposes and are not recommendations or trading advice. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. All of the information and opinions expressed by third-party guests are their own and are not necessarily those of NinjaTrader LLC. Trading futures involve substantial risk and may not be suitable for everyone, and trading futures can result in losses greater than the initial required margin. Traders should only trade futures with risk capital. Risk capital is money that you can afford to lose without jeopardizing your financial security or current lifestyle. You can find additional disclosure information on the NinjaTrader website.